Today I'm going to be talking about my Nordic heroes. So, there are so many Nordic heroes that are out there, but today we're just going to talk about mine. Um, as Maddie said, my background is a lot of Viking age textiles. So if anybody thinks they've seen me before, it's probably from being a Viking. But today we're going to talk about knitting. And I just want to lead in with I learned how to knit from my grandmas. Both of my grandmas taught me how to knit. And really, they should both be in this presentation, even though they're not. Um, and I just remember one time I went shopping with one of my grandmas, and she said to the clerk at the store, she got this from me. And I just thought, oh, that was the greatest compliment I've probably ever gotten. So, um, the knitting that I do usually focuses on the 18 and 1900s. And I really like to knit with heritage wools, and I think you'll see that throughout this whole presentation. So let's jump in with the next slide. We're going to talk about Merit, who I think both of you, everybody out there probably knows Merit Emstad. Um, Merit was born in 1841 and she died in 1929. She is a key person for all Nordic knitting. She was a shepherdess when she was a young girl, and she knit 3 pairs of mittens and took those mittens to church. And in the next slide, we'll see those. Those are the mittens. So she made the famous 8-pointed star mittens, took them to church, and everybody wanted them. Everybody followed her. So really, this 8-pointed star is not original to knitting. It's originally from Islam and Egypt. But she saw the design, they think, in woodworking and other pieces. And she took her sheep, 2 natural colors of sheep, put the colors together, and created really the first 2-color knitting in the Nordic countries. Before her, all of the knitting in the Nordic countries were really just one color. So, looking at these mittens, I'm sure everybody like I do sees Norway. Yeah, look at that great picture. So, this is where it led to. And what Merritt did is she hired hundreds of women and had them knit these mittens in the same pattern. She would then sell, not the same pattern, but the same style. She would then sell those to the Husfliden, and that they sold from there. But eventually, her mittens became a symbol of national pride because during her time in 1814, well, it was a little before her time, Norway split from Denmark, and then Norway split from Sweden, and then there became an identity crisis for Norway. Through that identity crisis, they were looking for something that brought them all together and gave them national pride. And these Selbu mittens really were something that gave Norway an identity. Um, and again, as I told you, she let women knit these from home. So this was another way that Emmett was my hero. She allowed women to earn their own living while being at home. So there's some rules to these mittens. There's one pattern on the inside, on the hand part, and there's another pattern on the outside. And then there's a stolpa or a line that goes up and around the mitten. So that's another one of the stolpas is a rule or a pole that goes around the edging. And the thumb is always knit with a gusset. So some of the really old rules of the Selbu mittens is on the cuff. The men's cuffs had a pattern and the women's cuffs were striped. They were always knit in black and white unless you were giving a pair for engagement. So if you were engaged to a man, you gave him a pair of mittens that were knit in red and black. And you'll see in the top row of this picture, there's a pair of red and black engagement mittens. We know them as black and white because that's really how they were photographed, but they were really done more of in a natural color. So a natural white and the black sheep. So that's where the colors came from. They didn't dye them originally. They came in the 2 natural colors from the sheep. Another old tradition is at weddings, every single man would receive a pair of these mittens. So if you were going to a wedding and were a single woman, you could knit a pair of special Selbu mittens and give them to a single guy as a little flirtation, which I thought was really fun. But mostly the bride would knit the mittens to give away. All right. And the next slide we're going to talk about, there we have another hero, Torres Torgum. She was born in 1891 and died in 1976. Torres was a Sami nomad teacher. So she trained to be a teacher, but she had some medical difficulties and could not perform all her duties. So she went back and applied to be a teacher for the Sami. And what that meant is she had to be a nomadic teacher. She had to, how do you spell? I just saw somebody asking how to spell her name. I'll spell it for you. Her first name is Teres, and her last name is Torgum, Torgrim. Torres Torgum. So she was a little different in her thinking of the Sami. She really immersed herself in their culture. She wore their clothing. She helped gather grass to make the shoes. And she encouraged people, especially her students, to bring in what their parents were making them in like mittens, any of the hand knits. She encouraged them to bring it into the schools. So through that, she was able to recreate some of the Sami patterns. She later on got married. Her and her husband adopted two children. And then she quit traveling as a nomadic teacher, but she was always interested in saving the culture of the Sami. In 1947, a church where she went to was going to church, they decided to restore the floor in the church. The floor had been covering some graves that were put down from 1748 on. And when they opened the floor, they also opened coffins. Inside the coffins, the knitting remained. There was some kind of great thing that happened that the knitting did not decompose and the knitting remained. So at this time, so like I said, it was 1947, she was in a wheelchair and she had them lower her down in her wheelchair and she looked at the knits. And if you go to the next slide, you'll see one of the pair of mittens that she found. And you'll see way up in the top, there's a diamond pattern. So she, of course, left the knits where they were. But as she was lowered in, she brought with her magnifying glass, lamps, paper, pencil, and she diagrammed everything out and was able to recreate like this pair of mittens with the diamond pattern up in the top. Um, so in the next slide, you'll see she had a niece. Oh, this is another pair of her mittens. So from the thumb down is what she had found for a pattern. And then from the thumb up, she recreated by guessing what the rest of the mitten would have looked like. So again, thumb down is what she found in the grave and recreated. I think these are so cool. And again, the color are natural, same color as the sheep. Shades of brown, black, and then the creamy white. So sorry about that. This is her niece. So Taurus had a niece. Her name is Erica Follick. Erica is a current knitter, as you can see, but Erica continued on the tradition. Erica met her aunt Torres when she was 15. Her dad and Torres were brother and sister. And Torres had a big influence on Erica, and she continued on with the tradition of preserving the Sami mittens. So in the background, you can see some of the patterns that she has found. Yep, that's fine. We can move ahead. And then you can see the mitten she's wearing right there is one that she's kind of she is preserving the traditional colors and heritage. Now, if you guys, she's collaborated with Laura Ricketts before, and I think you guys will. I've took a class through Vesterheim with Laura Ricketts, and her teaching is amazing. So I encourage you to take a class with Laura Ricketts if you ever can. So Erica and Laura Ricketts did a collaboration, and the lady they studied is in the next slide. Oh yeah, this is another piece from Erica. So you can really see one of the things that when Torres was studying those graves in the below the church floor, she found clear connections to modern patterns. Erica also found clear connections to modern patterns, and if you everybody who's looking at that is going, "Oh my gosh, that looks like it was just done recently," but it was one of the graves from an older find, Sami. You can tell the Sami colors in there. Okay, so the next one. This is Skate Maria. She was born in 1875, died in 1957. Um, in 1908, she married Lars Merrick. They settled on a small piece of land, and the small piece of land was called a skate. So that's where she got her name, Skate Maria. The word skate means area between where two rivers flow. So the piece of land where Maria and Lars lived is where two rivers united and then flowed into a lake. So in the next picture, you'll see she designed mittens that were very geometric. And the red and black mitten in this picture is the one that Laura Ricketts and Erica designed, excuse me, published a pattern on. And you can get that pattern through Pieceworks. And you can find Laura Ricketts does classes on that class, on that mitten. So these mittens were designed to be under uh, um, another glove, usually made of fur or leather. So normally these mittens would never have been seen. You can see on the side of those mittens, there's a little string, and the string was designed to go into your belt. So if you took these off, if you were getting too hot, needed to take those mittens off, there was always a string there to stick them in your belt so you wouldn't lose them. Kind of like kids lose their mittens today. So Skate Maria also, she was Sami and she followed the reindeer. And so these gloves are designed to be under reindeer gloves, as I said. So when Erica started looking at these mittens, Maria's children were really shocked. They didn't think that their mom was anything more than just another knitter. But she created these unique geometric designs. And as you can see, like up around the finger, there's a lot of color work, which creates a lot of stranding, creating a stronger color work area. Same with around the thumb. So her color work, even the geometric patterns look really cool, but her color work was done to make a more durable, wearable, knitted item. Really a genius lady. Um, so yeah, they were just designed for extreme wear. So some of the rules that she used for her Sami knitting is her cuffs were all the same. The making of her thumbs were all the same. The manner of decreasing on hers is always the same. So her design elements had those similar features all the time. And she always had the braid, so nobody would lose their mittens. In the next picture, this is another Sami mitten, not done by her, but also a Sami, just so you can see cuffs and the thumb. So these cuffs are different than Marie's, but the thumb is the same and the decreasing methods are the same pretty much throughout the Sami. Somebody just said, I love those so bright. I do too. Okay, next one. This. Moving along, this is Emma Jacobson. I just love Emma's work. Emma was born in 1883 and she died in 1977. In 1912, Emma became a doctor of botany. Her husband was a governor in one of the towns in Sweden, and in 1937, there was a depression. She went to her husband and said that she would like to form a co op, and her goal of the co op was to find a craft that women could do that did not require special equipment, but the women could still perform the task. She led this co-op until the 1960s. This co-op completely transformed her town and brought them out of the recession. So in the next picture, you'll see one of the pictures or one of the sweaters. This is one of the sweaters and a design card. Now, she had no local traditions to follow. So she used color, she used knitting and purling, she used wool and angora to create different textures, and she created this distinctive style. Now, she hired many designers, which was the goal to keep people employed and drive economics. She designed many design. She um, hired many designers. Something that made her stand apart is she gave credit to her designers. She was the first person to give credit to her designers. These designs, these Bauhaus designs, went on to be very famous and were thought of as very high fashion. They became worldwide sellers. So, kudos to Emma for bringing her area out of a depression. Next, this is Ingrid. Ingrid is a hero of mine because she did over 100 kofties, which are cardigans, and about 200 pieces she designed. So she designed these for Strike for knitting. She never got credit for her work. The 250 pieces that were published, she never got credit for her work, which is very common then. You'd make the design, you'd turn it over to the magazine, they would pay you, and that was it. Her daughter went back, her daughter's name is Vivian, went back, found some of her designs, was able to prove it was her mother's, and posthumously, she was recognized by the king. So in the next picture, you'll see one of her designs. I'm just going to hold up. I'm knitting this sweater right now. And I got to tell you, I love this sweater's picture with the pipe in her mouth. I just absolutely love it. So her daughter Ingrid went back and found some of her mom's designs that were not published. So in the next picture, you can see a design called Ingrid that has now been published. This is her mom's designs, but had never been published before. So this sweater is called the Ingrid sweater, named after her mother. This sweater is available in Norwegian if you look online for it. Okay, next we're going to talk about Bitten. This lady, Bitten Erickson, she was born in 1900 and she died in 1996. Doesn't she look like somebody you'd want to be friends with? I just think she looks like she's so much fun. In the next slide, we'll see that Bitten, she was a Nordic skier, alpine skier, and she's known as an innovator in the skiing world and in the knitting world. Look at her mittens that she's wearing in that picture. She's got the 8-pointed star mittens. In the next picture, you'll see that Bitten was married to an alpine skier. They did a lot of skiing together. He was also an Olympic skier as well. In the next slide, you'll see in the 1920s, that's another picture. That's on the right is her husband, and on the left is one of their skiing friends. Just gorgeous. And then in the next slide, she designed sweaters for the Olympics. So in the 1920s, she started working for Dale Garn. And this is one of her patterns that she did. She designed the first official Norwegian Olympic sweater for the 1956 Olympics. She had 30 knitters working for her. All of the knitters, all of the sweaters were hand knit. So you can see why everybody would love to wear those. In the next slide, in 1969, in the 1960s, 9 of the top 10 selling patterns for Dale Garn were designed by Bitten. Bitten had 2 sons. One's name was Marius and the other's name was Stein. Um, Stein was a freestyle skier, as you can see here. Marius was a pilot in the army and then became an actor. So Bitten had quite the life. Again, I would just love to be her friend. In the next picture is Un Dale. Un was born in 1926 and she died in 2002. Un designed the most famous sweater in Norway. 5 million copies of this sweater were sold, as you can see in the next slide. We all know this sweater. It's the Marius. So again, 5 million copies of that were sold just in 2011. So you can imagine how many people have knit that. This sweater was not originally called the Marius, but it turned into the Marius because of the model, as you see in the picture, is Marius, who is Bitten's son. So the sweater transformed into the Marius because of him. He wore it and he was the model. Un never got credit for this sweater or rights to it, but she did sell the pattern for 100 kroner, which is equal to about $235 today. So let's talk a little bit about some controversy. Um, Bitten, who we talked about before, said she was the original designer of this sweater. Dale Un said she was the original designer of this sweater. Um, but really, both of them said the original pattern for the 1929 set and stall sweater is what they both were inspired by. The set and stall sweater had a resurgence in the 1920s, and a third color was added in the 1920s. So if you go to the next slide, this is the set and stall sweater, and you can see the X's up in the top and the zigzags, which are really familiar in that Marius. Both Marius designs had the X's and the up and down. So let's go to the next one. Actually, can we go back 1 second? Just as a side note, sweaters had white in the bottom for many years. And if you see that and wonder why, it's because they wore vests all the time, vests and aprons. There was no reason to waste your color in the bottom. So they did all white work at the bottom. Okay, just a little side note. Moving on. This is the modern Marius, how it's developed, but you can see that 3 colors that started to come in the 1920s. So next slide. I'm going to go back to Un. Un started a company called Lillian Sports is the company that she started. This is 2 of her patterns. She had patterns called the Eskimo. She made many, many patterns. And she sold to Dior and Givenchy. So she really took the alpine ski sweaters and took them into high fashion. She hired thousands of women and they all did hand knitting. But what set On apart is she is the person who developed manuals and introduced techniques and measurements that are universal. So if you read a pattern now, the standards in the pattern came from Un. She was the one who made the first standards in patterning. So basically, all today's basic instructions for knitting came from her. Un did get the Norway's King's Medal in Merit in 2002, so she has gotten credit for her work. All right, next one. I'd like to talk just a little bit about a modern person, and this is Anna Moore Sunbow, and I'm sure many of you have seen her picture before. She was born in 1947. She isn't necessarily a knitter. Her background is weaving and being a weaving teacher and being a textile designer. So when she was going to school, she worked at a wool recycling center, and those are called shoddies. in Norway. So she worked at a shoddy, and what they do is they divide wool into different colors and then they recycle it. And they make a tweed wool out of the recycled. So she was going to school, seeing all this was happening, and what they were doing is taking sweaters, like I said, dividing it up by color and chewing it up and making a tweed yarn. She started to recognize that what they were throwing away was really destroying the craft. She said, I felt like I was erasing women's lives and their work while I was recycling. So she asked if she could save some of the patterns. And the person who owned the shoddy while she was going to school said, yes, so long as you buy the company. So she did. So if you go to the next slide, you'll see lots of her patterns in the background, but she pulled out patterns that she thought were very important and kept them and wrote them down. Um, the shoddy that she bought, just as a side note, is now a museum. And you can go in and see the patterns that some of the sweaters she pulled out. She's also wrote this book, um, Norway's Knitted Heritage, just in case I blocked my microphone. It's a really great book, and you can see the patterns that she pulled out of the recycling bin. Also, in this book, and I did not want to copyright any of her pictures, but she took pictures of the original, both original Marius sweaters. So it's really interesting to see the two side by side. They are very similar. All right. Oh, you guys, this is one of my favorite people in the whole world. So, not all Nordic knitters lived in Norway. As people left Norway and immigrated to the United States, they brought their patterning, their knitting with them. This lady's name is Albertina Tyvig Dixon. Albertina was born in 1885 and died in 1974. She lived in Pope County, Minnesota. In the 1920s, she was a tailoress in Minneapolis. But she came back to Pope County and she married a man named Ernest Dixon. She was 35 years old. He was 33 years old. He went away to World War One, but those two went to the same church. And my belief is that's where their romance started. So um, she married Ernest Dixon, like I said, when she was 35. In the next picture, that's Ernest. Don't you think they just would make a beautiful couple? All right, next picture. In the 1920 census, they had 5 horses, 9 cows, 9 young stock, 3 sheep, 2 hogs, $8 worth of chickens, 2 wagons, 1 automobile, and 1 watch. Later in the 20s, they moved to a larger farm. And in the newspaper, it said something about them working very hard and being very faithful to each other. In the next picture, in the 1930s, in the census, they had 4 horses, 1 less horse than they had before, 14 cows, just 5 more, 1 bull, 8 young stock, 8 hogs, they had 2 hogs before, $15 worth of chickens, 1 dog, and a sewing machine. Albertina finally got her sewing machine in the 1930 census. Notice that there was no automobile this time in the census. During that time, people would hide things so they didn't have to pay tax on it, and we believe that she hid the automobile. By the 1930s, they had 2 kids, Arthur and Bernice. Okay, in the next picture, this is the large farm that they had moved to. And then go to the next one. This is the dog that was in the census. In 1931, so 1 year later, Arthur passed away. He had double pneumonia Now remember, penicillin wasn't discovered until 1928. In the United States, penicillin didn't come here until 1945. And in Minnesota, it was December 29th, 1946 when we got penicillin. So penicillin would have saved him, but it wasn't here yet. At that time, the kids were 9 and 7. So Albertina, in the midst of the Depression, had to figure out how to make herself a living. She moved to what was called the Coburn Hotel in Terrace, Minnesota, which is in the same county, Pope County. And it wasn't too far from her original farm. She would rent a room or two in her Coburn Hotel, but she also had enough money from selling the farm to be able to buy land across the road where she had a horse and pasture. In the next picture, that's Albertina and her two children. In the 1940s census, she had one sewing machine. She kept her sewing machine, 4 cows, 4 young stock, $4 worth of chickens. Her obituary said throughout all of her life, her occupation was sewing and handiwork. So, next picture. This is a mitten knit by Albertina. We believe it was knit in the 1940s. And you can see the striped cuff, indicative of a women's mitten from the Selbu region. You can see the 8-point star. The boy and girl, the line dancers, typically would have been on a men's mitten down in the cuff, but she brought it up. So this is back to discovering how immigrants took their patterns to the United States, and Albertina is a perfect example. Um, I found this, yeah, this is another Albertina sweater. So this is an Albertina sweater that she knit, I'm guessing later. This is also in the Pope Museum. That mitten and one mitten and this sweater are in the Pope Museum. Just as a little side note, and Greg will talk about it at the end, I've recreated that Albertina's mitten and it will be a class offered next year through the Westerheim. So there are other pieces of Albertina's that were saved. They were donated by her son after her death. Okay, next. This is Albertina in the later years. She was loved by her community. Both her daughter moved away, her son stayed in the area. Everybody in the community called her Ma or Grandma, so you could tell it was terms of endearment. I got so into Albertina, I went to see the house that she lived in, the Coburn Hotel, which is now an abandoned house. And I've stopped by her grave to pay my respects to her. I think she is a truly remarkable woman. Okay. I encourage you guys to look for pieces that others have created and relook at them in a new light. A great place to start looking is where I found Albertina's mitten, and that's the minnesotacollections.org. I went on there. So all the historical societies, museums put pictures into this minnesotacollections.org. And you can go on there and see no matter what your hobby or what interests you, you can see examples of what are in museums and where they are. So I saw Albertina's mitten. Hope County, Minnesota is a 4-hour one-way drive from me. And I went down to look at one mitten. So I'm sure you, like all of my family, think I'm crazy, but I did drive 4 hours one way just to study a mitten. And it's a beautiful mitten. Okay, that is dedication. Thanks, whoever said that. Also, in this museum, I found these socks. They were kind of shoved back in a corner. They look just like socks. But as I was looking at these socks, in the next picture, you're going to see on the left-hand side, there's a line going down. That's a structural purl row. So that purl row adds structure to the sock. Now there's no elastic in these socks, as you know, it was before that time. These are 100% wool, no superwash. They needed some kind of structure, so they put a purl line down. So these socks were intended to go way up to your thigh. They're barn working socks. So in the next picture, you can see another thing that helps us date these socks. You can see she carried the wool, carried her colors up. So if you're a knitter in Norway, you never carry more than 3 rows. You cut off and put it in again. This is a really old school way of carrying your wool up so you don't have to cut. They have strict rules in Norway about their knitting. So this sock we could date to late 1800s, early 1900s, but the methods used in Norway were from the 1700s. Really interesting. Okay. And finally, I'm going to talk about not so Nordic. These are the herring girls. As you can see, they're from Scotland. And as you can see, their sweaters are pushed up. They're hand knit sweaters and they're pushed up. So, one of the ways I got into looking differently at knitwear is during COVID. The Shetland Islands did a seminar through their museum asking people to look at photographs and try to replicate sweaters. It was a fascinating webinar that I went to asking people to redo sweaters. But you look at photographs like this and try and recreate. Now, the reason that the herring girls were famous for their sweaters, like I said, look, they're pushed up. Before that, everybody had sweaters where the sleeves went down to your wrist. These guys had to modify their sweaters. Often one arm was longer than the other. Um, they all had patterning. So if you look really close, the lady on the left holding the fish, you can see there's patterning in her neckline. If you look at the lady way to the right, the far most right lady, there's some kind of patterning in the collar and a different patterning in the arms. These ladies worked mostly with one arm in the fish. That arm always was bigger. They always had like a bigger Popeye arm from working with the fish. Um, and if you're interested, I believe Scotland is still looking for people to replicate sweaters from photographs. So in the next picture, I think should be our last one. There are the ladies knitting with their sticks. No circulars back then. These ladies all had their sleeves were the same length, which I thought was interesting, but they were rolled up into cuffs. And the middle lady has it rolled way up and one sleeve down. So I don't know if the her arm on the left, that sleeve probably went all the way down to her wrist, and the other one stayed up, I think. Really interesting. This is my favorite photo. I agree. This is a really great photo. So I really encourage people to look at knitting in a different way. Look at photographs, maybe family photographs, photographs in your local museum, and try to recreate some of those patterns that might have been lost in time. So kind of be like Anna Stabo oh and more Stabo and look at things. Don't erase people's lives. Kind of recycle them or recreate them and let them live on. I guess is my message today. So that's all I've got. Does anybody have any questions?
Well, thank you. So I just wanted to say thank you before we get to the Q&A portion. Thank you so much for doing this and such an amazing presentation. So now, yes, as Steph has already said, we are now going to open up the floor to questions. You can use the Q&A function to submit your questions. I and Steph will be going back and forth, and if there's something that I don't catch, well, we have Maddie here too. So if you have any questions, please put them in the Q&A. I do remember seeing a few already in there. Well, can you describe the types of dyeing done in the on the Sami mittens?
Oh, honestly, I don't know, so I don't want to give a wrong answer. I will find out the right answer and get it to you, Greg. So when you send out the link, I
Ah,
do not want to give a wrong answer. Because those Sami mittens would have been before there was chemical dyes, so they had to be natural dyes. But I don't know what the Sami used. I could tell you what the Vikings used. I could tell you um other ones. I don't want to give a wrong answer. So I will find out. I will find out that answer. Interesting question.
And
I'm
then
writing that down.
I've noticed that you were able to answer the names. There were a few questions in the chat as the presentation was going where people just wanted to know how to spell their names. And so I
Oh,
was
yeah.
wondering if we could potentially either put that in the chat now, or if you'd like me to just add a list of all the names of people we talked about, and I can put that in the email that goes out as well.
Why don't we put it in the email? Because then they have it for a longer period of time to look at it. It doesn't go away.
Yes.
Is that okay?
No, it's perfectly all right. I just want to make sure that everybody has options because I see maybe three different times people asked for the spelling of names at different times. So I thought if we did all of
Okay.
them, that'd be great.
I'll
We
do a,
have
s- a s- I'll do a little bio with each one so people know who they are.
okay, that sounds fantastic.
Okay.
We have one question. Was Albertina born in Norway?
She was not. Both of her parents were born in Norway in the Nordfjord region, and then they came over to County, Minnesota. So she was actually born in Pope County, Minnesota. Both of her parents, from what I can tell, both spoke Norwegian, came from Norway. Um, the Nordfjord region has some beautiful sweaters, but she took this Selbu um, knitting style, which I thought was really interesting. So she took the eight pointed star, which is north of Nordfjord, even. And Nordfjord is known more for they're a little more roundish than the eight pointed star. Interesting little tip. That was a long answer for no. She was not born in the United States.
You know what? We got more information out of it, so we'll take it. I believe someone is mentioning the name of Anmore Sunbow's book that you had referenced earlier.
Norway's knitted heritage.
Thank you. We have a question here is with the special way of carrying the yarn up the sock, did that need to be given permission? You said that there are strict knitting rules.
Ugh. Norway has crazy knitting rules. Um, like the you can't carry yarn three rows up. So, um, if you want to get your master's through the Husfliden in Norway, you have to follow certain rules. And that would have been one of the rules of the time is you can't carry more than three rows. So what they did is she stopped knitting like two or three stitches before so she could kind of carry it up. She kind of snuck it up to the fourth row. So you didn't have to ask permission, but to be a true knitter, to be in the in club, to be cool, you had to follow the rules, and that was one of the rules. And they just didn't break them. They followed those rules. They learned to knit before they went to school back then. They knew every men and women both knit, and that's just the rules they followed.
We have one question for you.
Knitting
I
police. Yeah.
saw that in the chat too. Are there knitting police in America?
uh there aren't, but people will tell you they are knitting police, but there aren't. Enjoy your knitting, that's the rule.
We have one question for you, and I think the other one is more of a question for me, is what is the name of the pattern that you are currently working on that you had showed us? Like the one that you had shown the screen?
Oh, this one. The Stolzvatten sweater. Oh, I better put that in the. I'll put that in the email to because the spelling is this long. But that's the Stolzvatten sweater, and I'll also put in where you can find the pattern.
This is going to be quite the document that we'll be sending out to
Lori.
everyone.
Yeah. Does that mean I didn't? It wasn't
No, it means that like, there's probably another webinar we can do in the future, if anything.
Stolzvatten. The Stolzvatten pattern. It's a really great knit. I highly recommend the Stolzvatten pattern. And where? Okay, I made myself a note. I'll put that in there.
Oh, we just got a new question that just popped up. This one's for you. When was the Marius pattern produced in colors? Were there rules from Husfleden or from the Olympics Committee on producing this sweater?
Yeah, really good question. Let me go back to my notes here. So it came out for that. Um, the third color started to be added really before Marius became a sweater. Hold on. So the third color came in the 1920s. It became popular to add third colors. In 1929, that Stettenstall pattern came out. Stettenstall pattern was actually based off of the loose kofte made in the 1800s. So there was a pattern in the 1800s that was copied in 1929, which is that Stettenstall one with the white on the bottom. So I think throughout the Marius has always had three colors. I'm almost positive the Marius has always had three colors. Give me one sec. Yeah, I don't know if you can see this. So one of those is Bitten sweater. The one on the left. The one on the right is unsweater. The bottom right is the set and stall sweater. You can see they're pretty close. Really amazing.
We have a question
Oh,
in the chat. Besides wool, are there any other types of yarn acceptable and or used in Norway?
Mm, yeah. And it depends again on the police that you're talking to. But I've used linen that I've had that was milled in Norway. Um, they do mill some alpaca. I don't recommend that for heritage knits. I definitely do not recommend that for heritage knits. And cotton didn't come till quite a bit later. So mostly you'll see wool. And heritage, they are crazy into their heritage wools. They really believe in using their own heritage wools because it wears for their needs.
someone asked if they could see the wrong side of your sweater.
Yeah. That's a knitter who asked that question. Hold on. Let's see. Can you see it? Oh, I
Yeah.
got a string in there. Let me back up. So there's my wrong side. Generally, I carry 3 or 4 is the only length I carry my floats. Then I catch. That's
Oh,
kind of a Norwegian thing too. So if you have your knitting inside of inside, like it's in a tube and the strands are on the inside, you don't have to catch your floats. Otherwise, you never want to catch them like in a mitten. I catch it more because I don't want to catch my fingers. But in a sweater, 3, 4 is max that I'll go.
oh yeah, I wanted to know, do you know if what they are planning on doing with these patterns that are being reproduced from the photographs in Shetland?
Yeah, they are planning to put them in a museum. I think if they get enough people to reproduce the sweaters, they are going to put them into a book. They do want to sell them, but basically to go into the museum to get credit to the women that were doing that. It's really to go back and give credit to the women.
Well, that is all the questions that we have in the Q&A. I think we're all caught up in the chat. How about I do a
Okay.
little bit of a wrap up speech, and that will give I in no way, hey, we still got time before
Oh,
we told you. Oh, and so
thank you, Andrea.
I will just go through it. If any more questions pop up, please feel free. So I want to thank Steph, for this amazing uh, presentation. And thank you all for being here. And it was amazing to see everyone just contributing to the chat and the questions building upon each other. It was a great experience to be a part of. I do want to say a thank you to our collections, exhibitions, development, accounting, and communication and marketing teams for all that they do to make this possible behind the scenes. A recording of this presentation will be available on our YouTube channel soon. Here is because Steph mentioned this, I just wanted to say to keep an eye out for keep an eye out for one of our upcoming class catalogs, because Steph Anderson's Alberta Dixon inspired mitten class we're going to be aiming for October 2024. So please keep your eyes out for that. And then I just have a couple other suggestions for classes. We have the Let's Mend It with Maddie Barch on October 26th of 2023. Now that we're not planning all of our classes out for 2024. And then we also, if you find yourselves in the Decorah area, we have a quilt workshop and from the Bergen Free Text 2018 with Mike Ellingson. That's happening on October 7th from 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. at the Vesterheim Folk Art School. I also want to let everyone know you will receive a survey after this program. In order to help us better serve you, we are interested in your feedback and would really appreciate your thoughts. And on that, is there anything more in the chat from you, Maddie?
We have one extra question. Are there any museums you would recommend to visit?
Oh, I would say local. Try and go to your local museums and see what's around. There is a Selbu museum in Selbu, Norway, which of course I recommend, but that's not accessible to everybody. So I recommend anything local that you can get your hands on. Just look in the back corners because a lot of times they think textiles are not that important, and they're so important. So mittens, hats, things, socks are shoved to the side, and because other things are shiny and more fun to look at. But take a look at the in your local museums at things shoved way in the back, or ask. So, and I do want to say somebody pointed out in the chat that the Norway's Knitted Heritage book is in the Vesterheim gift shop, so that you could get it locally from you guys.
Oh, thank you. Thanks whoever did the research for us. That's
Yeah.
fantastic.